Last week, we published an episode about the synchronous fireflies of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. If you haven't heard it yet, go back and listen. It's one of my favourites. During my trip to the Great Smoky Mountains, I spent a lot of time wandering around in the dark, bumping into complete strangers, surrounded by huge crowds of people without any flashlights. It's quite the experience. The fireflies need the darkness to survive, to be able to light up and find their mates. But it got me thinking, what other creatures rely on the darkness? What kinds of things can we learn from lurking around in the dark? Well, it turns out nature writer Leigh Ann Henion had the same questions.
What's really shocking is that there is so much life that comes out of the darkness. It's so ingrained that the dark is a void, that darkness is associated with death. To experience darkness as this cornucopia of life, it's just mind-bending in a sense.
Leigh Ann has spent countless hours uncovering the mysteries of the darkness that unfold while we're asleep. She's explored bats, moths, spotted salamanders, and she's written a new book about it called Night Magic: Adventures Among Glowworms, Moon Gardens, and Other Marvels of the Dark. Today, a conversation with Leigh Ann Henion about what we can find in the darkness and how we can preserve it, even from our own back porch. From KURW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, welcome to the wild. Leigh Ann, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited too.
When we think of a healthy ecosystem or the building blocks of life, I think we think about sunlight and water. Why is darkness important for living things?
This book is really my journey to explore that. And it really has turned things upside down. I mean, to really start to think about the ecology of night is to really realize that I only knew half of the landscape that I thought I knew very well. So one of the things that was surprising is that I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I live in Southern Appalachia, and I live very close to the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is, a national park. People come, very famous for watching leaves change. And so, in the process of researching this night magic, I started realizing that it's not only the temperature change that cues these trees to start drawing inward to prepare for winter, changing into the, having all these glorious colors. It is temperature change, but it's also extended periods of darkness that cue these trees to start that process.
Right. The trees are getting ready to sleep kind of thing.
Trees are getting ready to sleep, yes. And so there have been studies. Actually, artificial light is changing the temporal season of leaf change in certain areas where light pollution is extreme. Trees forget to drop their leaves. And so in this sense, I think this is just an example of why is darkness important for living beings. And in this instance, it's a natural cue and it's a reminder to rest.
It's just, it feels like half our life is spent in darkness. We don't see it, right, because we're asleep usually, but it seems like an important side of the coin of life that we just don't even really think about, or we're not aware of, or active in. And it seems like you've discovered this world where that is the opposite.
Yeah, well, it's really wild because we do, half of our lives is in darkness, but I became acutely aware in this process of spending time with so many nocturnal animals and just, at focusing on darkness in general, to think about how strange it really is when it's dark outside to be in a extremely lit house, to be inside with all of the lights on, because, I've isolated myself with light in a sense. So stepping outside and spending time outside in the dark, in a sense, it's a forced kind of mindfulness. If you walk in the dark, you have to be careful where you're stepping. Like you can walk heel toe to make sure you're not tripping. But all those things are, it's a slowing down.
I love that. Forced mindfulness is a really lovely phrase that you just used. It reminds me of the world of audio that I now live in. I do films as well, but the podcast I love because we have to use our imaginations more to tell a story or describe a scene because you only have audio, you don't have visuals. It's very much the same, isn't it? Darkness doesn't have that visual element to it, but you've got to have this imagination or tools or know-how or that forced mindfulness to sort of enter that world and understand it. And it sounds like you've found an incredible place. I've got to say, I know you're a bit of a hesitant adventurer. I'm lifting that from the subtitle of your previous book. But now you have a book about lurking around in the dark. So you don't seem like a hesitant adventurer. But what made you want to explore nocturnal creatures in the first place?
Well, I am a little bit of a hesitant adventurer still. I think that one of the things, bravery, it's not necessarily not being hesitant. It's just like finding ways to work through that hesitation to move forward. I think if I wasn't a little bit hesitant, it, probably wouldn't be something that I needed to do. Because as one of the women in my book says, she says, well, if you're a little bit afraid of something, that means you probably have something to learn from it. And so I think that a lot of us are afraid of darkness. And I've become so much more comfortable with darkness, but still a little bit hesitant. But so the project came about a few years ago. A beloved editor at the Washington Post magazine, they had done a travel issue with the pandemic where it was travelers not traveling. And then they moved up to travelers writing about travel close to home. So he said, is there anything that has always really intrigued you about your home region? And so I live in Southern Appalachia. It's endlessly intriguing. But one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was I'd always wanted to go see the synchronous fireflies in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I went, and it was just a beautiful experience. I think that I initially pitched it. I was like, okay, I'm going to go, and I went to look for light rising, hope rising in dark times in the form of light. But so when I had this experience and I was walking around night after night, sometimes in crowds, hundreds of people with no artificial light, it was just such an unusual experience. And then I thought, how strange to have it be so unusual to walk in the dark at night. Right. Yeah, it's just we don't tend to do that. But there I was.
It's an odd sensation. I was, strangely enough, with the fireflies in Great Smoky Mountains National Park in June. For the first time. And I'm British originally. We don't have fireflies over there. In fact, we don't have them in the western half of the state. So, or maybe we do, but I've never seen them. So it's not something that's familiar. But I was dying to see them like you were.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible experience. Similar thing. We're out there in the middle of the dark, pitch dark. Can't see your hand in front of your face, can you, in the darkness that you need to see these creatures? Bumping into complete strangers. It's a whole different world of like, wow, the darkness is revealing in some ways, ironically, right?
Yes. And the fireflies themselves, fantastic, right? But so in that process, I also saw for the first time glowworms. Orphelia foetoni is an Appalachian glowworm species, cousin to the famous glowworms in New Zealand, which for years I had been like, oh, that would be so cool to go to New Zealand to see these glowworms, only to find out that the cousins, one of the only other places on Earth that, this type of glowworm can be found is in my home region. So it was all of a sudden there was this parallel universe right outside my front door. And I actually found just being in the dark like that to be incredibly restorative. We talk about darkness in really terrible ways. If you're left in the dark, you don't know anything. But I was finding that darkness had things to teach, and that darkness was revealing things that light could not reveal.
I could see that. Very restorative in some ways. Like very, It piques the imagination like it
Yeah.
has done culturally for thousands of years in human beings. And when I was there with the fireflies, the parallel sort of feelings to you. The fireflies were amazing because they were new to me. They weren't new to you, but they were new to me, especially the synchronous ones. But as important as that was just the atmosphere of people sitting around in the dark. It was really wonderful. Like we were all discovering something new together, and it wasn't just the fireflies, it was the darkness.
Yes! Because, I love when people gather to watch a sunset. And you go to these very special places, famous for the sunset, and people gather to witness this natural phenomena. It's such a special experience. It felt like a celebration of darkness in addition to light. And so I learned a lot about light pollution and how harmful that can be for fireflies. And so ultimately I thought, okay, if I learned this much and had this experience with fireflies, what might happen if I spent time with bats and salamanders and nocturnal blooming flowers, and what would all of these beings have to teach? And I think it was really, in the end, is about me kind of better understanding my relationship to darkness, and then also the human relationship to darkness, which has just shifted so greatly over just a couple of generations without a lot of attention, really, because it's just happened slowly. And you can, if you look at light pollution maps, you can see light pollution really encroaching wherever you are because darkness is becoming rarefied.
Yes, and we'll definitely get to light pollution. So you traveled around your region to learn about these nocturnal creatures and their relationship with darkness. Can you talk about some of the surprising discoveries that you made? I know you were unearthing lots of different creatures, but what were some of the surprising discoveries that you encountered on that journey?
Yeah, so I ended up spending a lot of time learning about ephemeral pools. So there are these temporary pools, and they're snowmelt, rain, they're temporary, they come in spring, and you can have an ephemeral pool that has more life concentrated there than in the surrounding 50 acres. And so this is where spotted salamanders actually migrate to these pools. And then, spotted salamanders, I learned they actually photosynthesize, which is wild. They spend their entire lives in darkness. They really only, migrate seasonally in spring there's just a few weeks in spring, but they come to these pools. But so it's only recently been discovered that they actually, in addition to having algae in their eggs, which has been a relationship and a process forever, they've actually just discovered that these salamanders actually have algae in their cells, in their bodies. So these are animals that photosynthesize, and they spend most of their lives in darkness, which I found to be truly wild.
Salamanders photosynthesizing. Can you explain that? And how do they photosynthesize in the dark? You don't need sunlight to photosynthesize?
So what actually happens? So spotted salamanders, they migrate to these ephemeral pools each spring. And so they go there, they lay eggs. So the eggs are in sunlight, right? So these salamanders are there. They're there hiding under leaves during the daytime until they go back to their burrows. But the eggs are there, and the eggs are exposed to light. And so you can actually watch, if you go, day after day, not just night after night, you can actually watch algae bloom inside of these eggs. And so there's this amazing relationship that they have where that happens. And then recently they've discovered that the spotted salamander actually has this algae, carries this algae in its cells.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And the salamanders I read in your book were a key species for you locally. Moths are also a big thing in your life since these discoveries, aren't they? Tell me about moths. What were the surprises there?
Yes. I love moths, and that is a shocker for a lot of people because I think that moths just get they have a terrible reputation. I think that people think of them as drab. They think of them as related to, eating clothes in a closet. But moths vastly outnumber butterfly species, and they are fantastically beautiful and so diverse. And so I actually attended an event called Mothapalooza, which is just as much fun as it sounds. So I went to
a moth conference, a moth gathering.
Yeah, I mean it's a moth gathering. I mean it's like a moth festival in a sense. I mean, there aren't bands,
Just
but it's
put out a bright light and everyone gets attracted to it.
yeah. So I mean, actually, yes, Chris, that is exactly what happens. So I mean, there are these moth stations. So you put a white sheet and you have multiple stations throughout the forests and fields there, and people just go station to station, like, bar hopping, but you're moth hopping, just to see what's going to come out of the darkness.
And what is it with moths? What is their relationship with the darkness that you experienced at Mothapalooza or in the Appalachians? How are they behaving in the darkness or in the light when they see it?
Well, that's another thing I actually realized is, over and over people are, oh, I don't like moths. Moths freak me out. You could have somebody who's like loves butterflies, but moths, no, they're always so wild and crazy. They're flapping around my porch light. And so I think that's actually key, because when we observe moths in the wild, like outside, we're often encountering a moth that is at a light. So this moth is being stimulated and is incredibly confused. We're watching a moth just beat itself against a light. And so it's scary, and they're freaking out, and people start freaking out. And so when you encounter a moth in its natural habitat, in natural darkness, it's a very serene experience, I mean, they're doing their thing, and it's fantastic.
We'll be right back. Let's switch to something that I think is really at the heart of your book, and you mentioned it a couple of times, and that's light pollution. There's an increasing body of research and knowledge out there about how light pollution from artificial light is negatively affecting nocturnal creatures. And can you tell me a little bit about your experiences with artificial light and how you saw it impacting nocturnal creatures, the ones that you became familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most acutely I noticed it with moths, because to watch a moth in artificial light is to truly watch it just flail. They're just being stimulated so greatly, and it really helped me absorb how light is a stimulant. It is a physiological stimulant, and it doesn't only affect moths, it affects me.
Yes, right. You mentioned something about some work in LA, because it's not just sort of an emotional, psychological effect that light has on us. Darkness is important for other things. What was the work in LA where they've done some studies on some molecules? Can you describe that?
Yeah, so that's related to air pollution. So the light pollution over Los Angeles has actually been found to be so great that it basically burns off these compounds that would naturally clean the air. So there are these compounds that clean the air, but they don't work in daytime, right? Like sunlight destroys them. So actually they found that light pollution has actually degraded air quality night and day, because the atmosphere isn't able to go through its natural processes, which, just like every living being, I mean, the atmosphere has, things happen in the day, things happen at night. It's a disruption.
Interesting. Wow. So the light pollution is affecting the quality of the air that we're breathing.
Yes, which is just wild to think about that. Yes.
Really is, yeah. It seems like you're somebody who's kind of explored this darkness in a psychological way. I can see that you've got this kind of connection now with the darkness. I do think there are concerns that people have, very real concerns, who feel unsafe in the dark. And what do you say to people who want to explore creatures in the dark a bit more, but they're worried about safety?
It's such a big question, and they're very real concerns. And I think, if you start looking, you'll find other people who have known the darkness and who are interested in sharing the darkness. So in a way that's safety in numbers, in that sense. But I do also want to say, while there are very real concerns, one of the things that really interested me in terms of large predators, their success rates are much higher in nights of high illumination, like a full moon night. So more light at night actually aids predators more than prey. So prey actually tend to use darkness as avenues of escape. And so I think that thinking about darkness, I feel like every story we have sort of thinks about darkness, things that are lurking in the shadows, like waiting to pounce on us. But in reality, we can twist that around and we can say, okay, what about the shadow that I can disappear into? Like, darkness isn't always harboring the danger. Sometimes darkness is safety.
I love that. That really turns things around. Thinking like a prey species heading to the dark to be safe and comfortable.
Yes. Yes. So it is an absolute countercultural twist.
And I like the idea of exploring the dark with other people. Makes the place feel a bit more comfortable
Yeah.
and manageable, doesn't it? Starting in groups, starting on a guided walk in the dark. I think, there's the backside to this where it could create problems. I mean, we don't have the greatest track record with leaving wildlife alone, and as soon as something goes viral, people end up loving it to death. So what's the best way for humans to interact with darkness and the creatures in the dark without disturbing them or making it backfire on us?
I know, Chris, this is like such an important thing that I think about all the time. I love darkness now. And I'm like, it's like, someone publishes a travel story about your favorite place and you're like, don't do it. So, I think that the best way to explore darkness is to just start wherever you are. If you can find a dark space, the darkest space that you have in your local community, in your yard, wherever, as close as you can, if you can find a space, and access is difficult. You don't want to just show up, and it's tricky to find a place that you can safely be in the dark or feel, that you have permission to be. But I think that starting wherever you are is great.
And how do you tread carefully?
Well, if you're literally treading carefully, walking heel to toe is a really good way to walk through the dark, which is actually something that I noticed I actually do it a little bit naturally. But I did a foxfire walk with a guide who that was something that he pointedly said, if you walk heel toe, when you're not able to see, you're much less likely to trip. But so treading carefully in terms of habitat.
It's amazing how I do a lot of camping for my work and for fun as well, and just around other people doing the same thing. And so many people are just not used to the dark to the extent that even on a full moonlit night, they grab a flashlight when they don't really need it. Or even when it's not a full moonlit night, people reach for the light as a safety thing, it's a habit, right? And I'm always encouraging people to switch them off and try and just be in the darkness and sort of adjust. But it takes a while. It takes a while to realize that it's okay to do that, right? Because your eyes are adjusting. But when you do, it's a whole different experience. Night walks can be incredible, can't they? The toe to heel thing is wonderful too, because it makes you tread carefully, doesn't it?
Yes.
And makes you feel less concerned about tripping over a log that you can't see or stepping on a creature that you can't see. I love the tricks to it, of mind over matter as much as anything, as well as the practical tips of being out in the dark.
Back to the question of how to protect, habitat and, sending people out in the dark. And it's always so dangerous to get people excited about experiencing something because there's trampoline and all of these things that can happen. And so that is a very real concern. And it's one of the reasons that lottery situations have been created to see the fireflies and these various phenomena. But, there's the mechanical concerns, like the physical concerns, but there are also, concerns related to light pollution. And I think that it's a fine line in so many different ways to get people to have these meaningful experiences that introduce them to things enough to care about them versus, introducing them to things that they then trample and don't care, end up destroying habitat. But one of the interesting things about this in particular is that when we talk about habitat, we're not just talking about the forest floor or the grasslands or we're not talking just about the terrain in that sense. We're talking about night, natural night. We're talking about darkness.
And what are some of the things that people can do right now to help with the problem of artificial light?
Well, just sit on your porch, turn off the lights that you usually would leave on, and just listen and just wait and see what reveals itself. And then also in terms of around our own houses? Are there lights that we can do without? Can we use timers on lights instead of leaving them on all the time? There are some great guidelines by organizations like Dark Sky International that talk about, shielding and things like that can help reduce light pollution. And I think that one of the very important things that I've learned about is that the light spectrum really matters. So, LEDs are so popular, energy efficient, but they're often blue spectrum light. Blue spectrum, basically indicates to a lot of creatures that it's daylight. But if you can use warmer tones, that's really helpful. A lot of times people in the field will use red lights. And I've actually started using red lights in my house.
Okay.
So, in terms of light, like porch lights, even an amber light is better than a blue light.
Leigh Ann, when you search your name on Google, when you look for the words Leigh Ann Henion, what pops up are words and references like awe and wonder. And these are two of my favorite words because I think that the natural world that I'm in love with is full of awe and wonder. I talk about those words all the time. You're closely connected to those words. Can you just describe for me the awe and the wonder that you have found in the darkness?
So awe is such a powerful emotion. And I think that awe is often a little bit tinged with fear. So I think that darkness, to feel comfortable with darkness, to appreciate darkness, is truly to expand your known world.
Leigh Ann Henion is a New York Times best-selling author based in Boone, North Carolina. Her most recent book is Night Magic: Adventures Among Glowworms, Moon Gardens, and Other Marvels of the Dark. Leigh Ann, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for revealing this world of darkness that's really so full of life to us all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, as always, for listening to The Wild. Don't forget to check out our Instagram. We've got some great images and thoughts from the field, including pictures from our new National Park episodes. Find us at The Wild Pod and at Chris Morgan Wildlife. The Wild is a production of KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, with support from Wildlife Media. This show wouldn't be possible without listener support. You can help us to continue to create this special immersive storytelling by donating to KUOW. Go to kuow.org/donate/thewild, and thank you. Our producer is Lucy Suchek. Jim Gates is our editor. The Wild is hosted, produced, and written by me, Chris Morgan. A very special thank you for their kind financial support to Jill and Scott Walker, Rose Letwin, Alan Ferguson, Anna Kimball, John Taylor, Paul Lister, Bob Yelleys, Barbara Stallman, and Barton Brooks. Our production team includes Roy Campanella III, April Craig, Marshall Eisen, Michaela Gianotti Boyle, Tatiana Latre, Matt Martin, Kara McDermott, Amelia Peacock, Darcy Riggin-Schmidt, Brendan Sweeney, and Hans Twite. Our theme music is by Michael Parker. I'm Chris Morgan. Take care of yourselves, and maybe sit outside on your porch tonight in the dark. You might be surprised by what you see.